Hey YouTube, this is Jared with the most passionate show on YouTube about taxes. That's right, taxes. And today we're going to answer the question, I haven't filed in years. Did the IRS forget about me? This is one of those questions that comes up a lot, actually. Sometimes people don't make a lot of money or they just forget and then they put it off and they never hear anything. And then they start to wonder, did the IRS forget about me? Did I ever really have to do that? Is this, I heard, sometimes people even think about the fact that they heard taxes were voluntary, and we'll address that in another episode, what precisely that means, because there's a lot of confusion about that. And so they think they maybe just don't need to anymore because they haven't heard anything. And we'll kind of go over today what happens in that process once you stop filing. So you've got some good information about that. We'll get there in about 2 minutes, but just a little bit about our show first, and then we'll get right into that question and dive into it. So my name's Jared. And I run this particular show, call it Tax Relief 101 at this point. Maybe we'll change the name later. I don't know. I'm still learning about how to put together these and how to market them. So you might see some things shift up in the future as I learn more. So there's that. And this is my show, and I do it about taxes. Sometimes we talk about other types of debt. Sometimes we talk about other types of personal finance. Sometimes we bring on people to interview. That's one of those really fun ones, subject matter experts, people who have a really neat little niche where they know a lot about a little, or maybe they have a couple niches and they know a lot about those couple different things, more so than the average person. I get to learn a little bit. You get some great information. A lot of this information on here, if you tried to sit somebody down who knew it all and get them to tell it to you, it would cost you a couple grand for their time by the time you were done. But we give it to you for free here, along with eventually some great free resources, and as well as potentially some other giveaways of stuff related to kind of what we're talking about. And the reason I do this is because there's a lot of bad information on the internet, and I wanted to put some good information out there. And along with that, I had some friends and family who, through no fault of their own, actually, ended up on the wrong side of kind of IRS kind of collections type stuff, and that's kind of specifically what I do. And it's actually the fault of the people who were doing their taxes, quite frankly. But it made me kind of see what it was really like to go through that. And I had dealt a little bit with that, had a little bit of specialized training just to try to get myself up on it. But after that, I was really like, this is a really important thing to do for people. And there's a real opportunity to make a big difference in people's lives. The IRS is not an easy place to navigate. In a lot of cases, unless you really know their rule book better than them, they have all the power. I really just saw a way for me to kind of specialize in a skill set area that would let me make a real big difference in people's lives. Both kind of, paying clients because I gotta fund my life, but also for some of the pro bono work I do. Filed an offer in compromise recently where there's somebody who was, kind of below the poverty threshold, but it was, it was around $20K, and it was $25 is what they ended up paying, and that's not right for everybody. And those get oversold all the time. People, you see commercials for that kind of stuff, and for the most part, it's crap the way they're advertising it. But an ethical practitioner can file that for the kind of client that actually qualifies, and it can have amazing results. It's just mind-boggling what it can do, and how much you can change someone's life who's been struggling with the IRS. So, and I'll say this whenever I bring these up, I tell people to go away from those, to not do that kind of offer and compromise more than I will actually file it for them. Most of my initial conversations with my clients about why they don't want to do that, because everybody thinks they can get it and they're holding on to that hope, and nobody believes them when when they don't have debt, but when they do, they're like, well, maybe I'll be the one. But the reality is that most of those offer and compromise commercials out there, they have very low acceptance rates compared to qualified candidates when people actually take the time to qualify people, and they charge people very high prices, and they just run them through. And that's how that works. And it's well documented, and it's very common if you look at the consumer protection sites to see that they're constantly being taken down and sued by consumers and by consumer protection agencies and by the U.S. government. So I always kind of say that after I talk about one of those, because there's so much misinformation out there. But today, the only other thing is if you get any questions about this, make sure to leave them below. Subscribe if you find us helpful. And as always, ask questions. Like I tell people, we'll usually spin one up probably that day if we see the question, and we'll add it as a special episode. If you want, we'll give you a shout out. If you want us to be private, we can do that too. We won't mention who did it, or we'll black out your name, that kind of thing. And yeah, that's all we've got at this point other than answering the question. We took a little bit longer this time to get there, but so the question was, I haven't filed my taxes in years. Did the IRS forget about me? And the answer is probably not. There is the chance that depending on looking at your transcript and your past wages, if you didn't actually have any income, they may not necessarily file an assessment against you. But if you had any income reporting documents, if you had a 1099 or a W-2, which if your employer wasn't intentionally paying you cash under the table, you probably had one of those sent into the IRS even if you didn't notice it. What'll likely happen in kind of 3 to 5 years, even if the IRS doesn't send you a letter before then, is that they will do something called a substitute for return, or an SFR. And the technical term is substitute for return, but I always tell people to think about it like a state filed return. That's not what it means. But that helps people get the sense of what it is. They can file a return for you on their records, and they make an assessment based on kind of the max tax that you could possibly owe. So if you've got, you're married, you got 2 kids, before you stopped filing, you were paying mortgage, interest, and property taxes. You itemized on your Schedule A. When they file that, you're going to be married filing jointly. They might not even put your kids on the return, and you're certainly not going to get, depending on your income bracket, earned income credit or child tax credit. They're not going to add that in there. Of course, you can challenge this. You can file a return over that. You can do an audit recon. There's all sorts of kind of like options around how to challenge that assessment. But the answer to the question is, now the IRS probably didn't forget about you. It just kind of, the speed at which the IRS goes, a lot of people don't get letters about their most recent return until like 12 to 18 months sometimes for actual like audits or correspondence. Sometimes they'll get like CP2000s, which are a letter they send out usually when an income reporting document didn't match, is sometimes when they send that kind of thing out. So that's people will get that quick. Or if a credit gets denied, sometimes people will get those letters quicker, like during tax season. But as far as being audited, it can be 12 to 18 months, sometimes 2 years before you hear about that return, because just how long it takes to go through the IRS's system and get all that done, and kind of just move people through the backlog. So because of that, it can be very easy for someone to kind of not file, and think that, yeah, I guess they're not coming after me. Maybe I don't need to. Well, the reality is they probably will. It's just going to take time. And, I always remind people when I say this, I don't really have a vested interest as much as some people might think in being like, no, you should absolutely file and pay someone to do it. I do file taxes for people, and I have some other kind of things that I do in my practice that are finance related. But the bulk of my practice is this kind of audit and rep work. So actually you're hearing from someone who actually gets paid to fix these kind of problems that you're probably going to end up having these problems if you don't file and do the thing that I don't make my money off of. So, I don't know how you can get less of a conflict-free suggestion from a professional. This is, This is kind of the anti-sales pitch. This is, if people do, I make my money when people usually don't do these things. I kind of wish my job didn't exist, but like I said, I found out how important it can be to have somebody skilled to help people when they run into problems. Ideal world, my work doesn't exist, but it does. And so, I always tell people to listen to kind of my experience because I help people clean this kind of stuff up regularly. And they don't really want to have to hire me for that. That's not the ideal solution. So, just because you haven't heard from them doesn't mean they won't come after you later, with the max assessment possible, and then you'll have to prove that, all the while getting the letters, and, depending on how far it's gone, they might try to levy your account or garnish your wages. It really just makes sense to file. Even if you have no income, I always tell people to always file, because if you really have no income, you can get it done for free, usually through a Vita clinic or through any number of programs for kind of people with simple tax returns who have no income. It doesn't take that long, and it helps stop this kind of thing from happening. IRS then has to challenge that versus just saying, oh, well, we think they had this much income based on what we see, or these income reporting documents, even though you had expenses or something that overrode it. You really want to get that in there, so it's harder for them to try to assess you more tax. So that's the answer to that question. What if I haven't filed my taxes in years? Did the IRS forget about me? And the answer is probably no. They just take a long time. So that's kind of the answer for today. As always, if you understood, excuse me. We don't do a lot of editing here. This is just kind of off the cuff, and it's a fun thing for us to do. So you'll see kind of bloopers like that occasionally. But if you found this helpful, subscribe. If you've got a question about today's show, or maybe a question in general, put it down there. We'll normally respond. Sometimes we'll even respond that day if we see it. We'll fire up the system and we'll answer the question. So there's that. Share this with other people if you think it'd be helpful. You never know who it's going to help or who's struggling. Sometimes people won't say anything, but it's always good to have information too in case something comes up or somebody else has a problem. Let's see. The question for next week is what to do if you have an IRS lien on your credit report and it's hurting your credit, or maybe it's keeping you from getting jobs. We're going to talk a little bit about what you can do about that lien, what a lien is, that kind of stuff. It might end up turning into a couple podcast series because there's a couple different questions in there. But we're going to talk about liens on your credit report, how they affect them, what to do about them, how you can challenge them, what kind of your rights as a taxpayer are. And just a little bit about kind of what that lien is and kind of why the IRS does it and how they go about it, just so just enough to really understand kind of the law that you need to understand what they're doing. But we'll keep it really low tech and enough information so that maybe you can do something about it or figure out kind of how you might get that off your credit report, because there's some really easy things you can do that might let you just erase it. So stay tuned for that. And then the only other thing, we got our question of the day as far as, kind of want to hear your feedback, hear your thoughts, because, your thoughts matter too. We all have our opinions as tax advisors. And I have my opinions on lots of these. Some things I really don't have an opinion on. Depending on if it's kind of the moral, ethical side of some of this stuff, as far as people pursuing certain positions, as long as they're legal, it's my job to advise people. But what do you think about the fact that it usually takes so long for the IRS to audit people? It's 3-4 years before they get back to you about not filing a return, or if they audit you, maybe it takes 2 years, and if then they make an assessment, then you've got penalties and interest based on that time period. I really wish they'd respond to people quicker. Maybe you're getting a little bit of an opinion there, but, what do you think about those long timetables? Have any thoughts? Some people might say that waiting for 3 or 4 returns is really efficient, because then you have one person handle that case, do all those. It saves time. It's efficient for the government. effective tax administration. Now, it's an argument some people might make, but I'm curious kind of like what you out there in YouTube think about it, as opposed to what some tax geeks might think. So that's all for today. And other than that, you guys have a great day, and we'll see you on the next episode where we talk about liens.